The voicemail came in at 11:14 on a Wednesday night while I was sitting in the parking lot of a 24-hour pharmacy waiting for my migraine prescription to be filled. It was my mother. She was crying so hard I had to listen to it 3 times before I could make out the words. She said, "He hit me again, Nora. I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving him. But I need your help. Please. I need somewhere safe to put money where he can't find it." I sat in my car under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the Walgreens lot and pressed my phone against my forehead and breathed. Because here's the thing about hearing your mother cry like that when you are 29 years old and you spent the first 14 years of your life watching her get knocked into walls. It doesn't matter how much therapy you've had. It doesn't matter that you moved 400 miles away. It doesn't matter that you are a grown woman with a career and a savings account and a calm, ordered life in a city where no one knows your maiden name. When your mother calls crying and says the word hit, you are 8 years old again, sitting on the stairs in your pajamas, watching the kitchen light flicker through the crack under the door, and you will do anything she asks. My name is Nora. I'm a pediatric nurse at a children's hospital in Richmond, Virginia. I've worked there for 6 years, since I finished my BSN at 23. And in that time, I've done something I used to think was impossible. I saved $91,000. Not because I'm wealthy. Pediatric nurses are not wealthy. I saved it the way people like me save anything, by saying no to almost everything for a very long time. I drove a 2014 Civic with a dent in the passenger door. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with a window unit that sounded like a helicopter. I packed my lunch every single day, the same rotation of rice and beans and whatever vegetables were on sale, and I worked overtime on holidays because the differential was time and a half, and because honestly I didn't have anywhere else to be. $91,000 was supposed to be 2 things. First, the last $42,000 of my nursing school loans paid off in one clean transfer. Second, a down payment on a small house in a neighborhood called Churchill, where the porches were wide and the trees were old, and I had been watching a listing for 3 weeks that I was almost ready to call about. That money was not an abstraction. It was 5 years of my life converted into a number. It was proof that the girl who used to hide in her closet when the yelling started had built something real and quiet and entirely her own. I need to tell you about my family because none of this makes sense without it. My mother, Valerie, married my stepfather, Dale, when I was 6. My biological father left when I was 2, and for a long time my mother treated his absence like a wound she was entitled to pass on to me. Dale came in as the fix. He was charming at first, the way men like that always are. Generous with gifts, quick with compliments, the kind of man who remembered your teacher's name and brought flowers for no reason. The hitting started about a year in. Not every day, not even every week, but enough that our house had a rhythm to it, a tightness in the air you could feel before anything happened, the way animals know a storm is coming before the sky changes. My mother stayed. She stayed for years. She said it was complicated. She said we didn't understand. She said he was trying. And I, a child, believed her because what else was I supposed to believe? When I was 14, Dale shoved my mother into the refrigerator hard enough to crack the handle off, and she finally called the police. They separated. I thought it was over. It was not over. 3 months later, they were back together. Dale had done a 6-week anger management program, and my mother said he was changed. I was old enough by then to know what changed meant in that house. It meant the same thing with a longer fuse. By the time I left for college, I had learned 2 things very clearly. The first was that my mother would always choose Dale. The second was that the only person who was going to protect me was me. I moved to Richmond. I got my degree. I built my life. I called my mother every Sunday, a ritual I maintained out of love and guilt and the stubborn hope that one day she would pick up the phone and tell me she had finally left. For 12 years, she never did. Until that Wednesday night in the Walgreens parking lot. She called again the next morning, calmer but still shaky. She told me she had been planning to leave for months. She said Dale had gotten worse recently. More controlling, more paranoid about money. She said he had started monitoring her bank account and that she couldn't move any cash without him seeing it immediately. She needed a safe place to put money, just for a few days, 48 hours at the most, while she got her things together and drove to her sister's house in Tennessee. She asked if she could be added to my checking account so she could transfer in what she'd managed to set aside. She said it was $6,000. She said she'd move it to her own new account as soon as she got to Aunt Carol's. She said, please. She said she was scared. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that moment. There was a voice, small and clear, that said, don't do this. It was the voice I'd built over 12 years of therapy and distance and learning to recognize when love was being used as a lever. But there was another voice, louder and older, and it said, "This is what you've been waiting for. She's finally leaving, and if you say no, and something happens to her, you will carry that for the rest of your life." I added her to the account. It took 9 minutes through my bank's mobile app. I texted her the confirmation, and she wrote back a single heart emoji and the words, "Thank you, baby. You're saving my life." She did not transfer $6,000 into my account. What she did, over the course of the following 72 hours, was transfer $91,312 out of it. All of it. Every cent I had. She did it in 4 separate transactions, spaced 12 hours apart, to accounts I had never seen. I discovered it on a Saturday morning when I tried to buy gas and my card was declined. I stood at the pump holding my phone, watching the screen load, and I remember the sound of the gas station very clearly. Someone's radio playing through an open window, a kid laughing by the air pump, the mechanical click of the nozzle resetting. The balance said 0, not 6,000 less, not a partial withdrawal, 0. I drove home, I sat at my kitchen table and I pulled up the transaction history and I read every line and then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was normal, not shaky, not scared, normal, the way you sound when you're expecting a phone call you've already prepared for. "Mom," I said, "my account is empty." There was a pause, not a long one. "Nora, I need to explain something to you. Where is my money? Dale is in trouble. Serious trouble. The IRS has been, 'Where is my money, Mom?'" She took a breath. "He owes back taxes. 4 years of back taxes on the business. If he doesn't pay by the end of this month, they're going to put a lien on the house. We could lose everything. I was going to tell you. I was trying to find the right time." I closed my eyes. "You told me he was hitting you. You told me you were leaving. He is difficult, Nora. You know that. But this is about survival. If we lose the house, you lied to me. I did what I had to do to protect this family." And then she said the thing I will never forget. "I will hear it when I am old. I will hear it in my sleep." She said, "You should be glad you could help. Not everyone gets the chance to save their family." I set my phone face down on the table and I stared at the wall above my sink where I had taped a printout of the Church Hill house listing. The wide porch, the old trees, the asking price circled in blue pen. I stared at it for a very long time. Here is what I did not do. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not drive to North Carolina and stand in my mother's living room and demand anything. I had spent my whole life reacting to crises in that house with panic and grief and the desperate need to fix things, and I was done. What I did instead was open my laptop, and I started making a list. I called my bank. The fraud department was closed on Saturdays, but I reached a supervisor who flagged the account and initiated a freeze. I asked her to document that the joint access had been granted under false pretenses, specifically the claim that my mother was fleeing domestic violence and needed temporary emergency access. She said that language mattered, and she made sure it was recorded. I called a lawyer on Monday, not a family friend. A woman I found through the Virginia State Bar's referral service, who specialized in financial fraud and elder abuse, though in my case it was the reverse. Her name was Margaret. She was 58, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had the particular steadiness of someone who had heard every version of this story and was no longer surprised by any of them. She listened to me for 40 minutes without interrupting. Then she said something that changed the shape of everything. "Nora, I need to ask you something. Do you have a half-brother?" I did. His name was Caleb. He was 22, Dale's son from before my mother. We had grown up in the same house, but we were never close. Not because of any animosity, but because Dale kept Caleb at a careful distance from me, the way you keep two things separate when you don't want one to contaminate the other. Caleb was quiet, bookish, the kind of kid who wore headphones everywhere and never seemed to be in the room even when he was sitting right there. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. "I'm going to suggest," Margaret said, "that you reach out to him, because the IRS situation your mother described is real." I checked. Your stepfather does owe back taxes, but the amount is not what your mother told you. It's significantly more. And from what I can see in the public filings, there have been other people who have contributed money to this debt before you. This wasn't a one-time desperation. This is a pattern. I called Caleb that evening. He picked up on the first ring, which surprised me. He said, "I was wondering when you'd call." He said it the way you say something you've been rehearsing. "Nora, I need to tell you something. I heard them planning this. A month before Mom called you, they were in the kitchen. Dad was showing her how to do the transfers from the app. He told her exactly what to say to you. He told her to use the abuse story because he said he paused, and I could hear him swallowing. He said it was the one thing that would make you say yes without asking questions. I sat down on my bedroom floor, not because my legs gave out, but because the floor felt more real than anything else in the room. They practiced it, Caleb said. Mom practiced crying. I'm not making this up. I recorded one of the conversations. I didn't know what to do with it. I've had it on my phone for 3 weeks. I want to tell you about the sound my brain made in that moment. Not a sound exactly, but a sensation, like a long hallway you've been walking down suddenly, ending at a wall. Not a locked door. A wall. No way through. Just the flat, permanent fact that your mother sat in her kitchen and practiced crying so that she could call you and pretend her husband was beating her so that you would give her access to every dollar you'd earned in 5 years. I didn't cry then either. That came later. The recording was 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. Caleb sent it to me by email with the subject line, "I'm sorry." I listened to it once. I forwarded it to Margaret. I never listened to it again. Here is what I learned over the next 6 weeks, assembled piece by piece through Margaret's investigation, Caleb's memory, and the public records we subpoenaed. Dale's tax debt was not 4 years old. It was 7. The total amount owed, including penalties and interest, was $318,000. It had started with unreported income from a contracting business he ran in the early years of his marriage to my mother, and it had compounded year after year while he ignored every notice the IRS sent. My mother was not an innocent bystander. She had co-signed the business filings. She had helped him open accounts to move money between entities to obscure the trail. And when the pressure became unmanageable, they had begun extracting from family. I was not the first. Caleb told me that 2 years before my mother called me, Dale had borrowed $35,000 from his own brother, Frank, telling him it was for emergency surgery that never happened. The year before that, my mother had taken $12,000 from her elderly mother's savings account, using a power of attorney she had obtained when my grandmother had a minor stroke. That money was never returned. My grandmother still didn't know. I was simply the largest and most recent withdrawal from a family account they had been draining for years. The difference was that I had a recording, a paper trail, and a lawyer who did not believe in second chances when it came to financial fraud. Margaret filed a civil suit in the second week of November. The same week, she reported the misuse of my grandmother's power of attorney to Adult Protective Services. I authorized both actions on the same afternoon, sitting in her office with a cup of coffee that went cold in my hands because I forgot to drink it. People ask me if I hesitated. I did not. The thing about watching your mother exploit your deepest trauma, the memory of violence you witnessed as a child, the fear you carried in your body for 20 years, to steal your money, is that it simplifies things. Not immediately, but eventually, the question stops being, how could she do this? And becomes, what am I going to do about it? And the answer to that question, I found, was surprisingly clear. The next 4 months were not simple. My mother called constantly. The first week it was rage. I was ungrateful. I was destroying the family. I had always been selfish. Always been the one who thought she was better than everyone else. The second week it was bargaining. She could pay some of it back. She just needed time. If I dropped the suit, they could work something out. Dale could refinance the house. The third week it was silence, which was somehow worse because silence from my mother never meant peace. It meant planning, Dale called once. He spoke for 4 minutes in the even, measured tone of a man who has spent his life controlling rooms. He said I was making a mistake. He said this was a family matter and I was turning it into something ugly. He said, "You don't want to do this, Nora. Trust me. You don't want to go down this road." I saved that voicemail too. Margaret said it could be useful. It was. Caleb drove to Richmond on a weekend in December. He was taller than I remembered, thinner, with the same guarded posture he'd had as a kid. Shoulders slightly forward like he was always bracing for something. We sat on my couch and ate Thai food from containers, and he told me things I had never known. He told me that Dale had taken money from his college fund when Caleb was 17 and told him there had never been a college fund. He told me that our mother had forged Dale's tax documents for at least 3 years, not because Dale forced her, but because she was afraid that if the IRS came after him, she would lose the house and the life she had built around it, even though that life was built on quicksand. He told me that he had started keeping a notebook 2 years ago, dates and overheard conversations and screenshots of bank notifications he wasn't supposed to see, because he knew eventually someone was going to need proof, and he knew it wouldn't be believed without it. He was 22 years old, and he had been building an evidence file in a composition notebook like a kid detective, except the crime was his own parents, and the evidence was the systematic financial destruction of everyone around them. I looked at this quiet, thin young man sitting on my couch, my half-brother, the boy I had never been close to, and I understood something I had missed for years. He had been alone in that house the whole time. After I left for college, after I moved to Richmond, after I built my careful, distant life, he was still there. Hearing everything, seeing everything, and doing the only thing a kid with no power can do. He wrote it down. That was the moment I cried. Not when I saw the zero balance, not when my mother told me I should be glad I could help, not when I heard the recording of her practicing her tears in the kitchen. I cried because my little brother had been carrying all of this alone, and the composition notebook he pulled out of his backpack to show me had my name written on the first page with the note, "For Nora, when she needs it." He had been waiting for me. The case settled in March. Margaret was extraordinary. Between the recording, Caleb's documentation, the bank's fraud investigation confirming the access was obtained through misrepresentation, and the pattern of similar extractions from other family members, the evidence was overwhelming. My mother and Dale agreed to a settlement that included full repayment of the $91,000 plus legal fees, a structured payment plan enforced by court order, and a lien on their home. Additionally, the Adult Protective Services investigation into the misuse of my grandmother's power of attorney resulted in the revocation of that power and a separate civil penalty. The IRS investigation into Dale's tax fraud, which had been proceeding independently, accelerated after our filing provided additional documentation. Dale received a conviction for tax evasion, 2 years of probation, mandatory repayment, and a permanent prohibition from operating a business in the state. My mother received a suspended sentence and community service for her role in the financial fraud. She also lost her position as treasurer of her church's women's auxiliary, a title she had held for 9 years and that I suspect she grieved more than anything else. I did not attend the hearings. I had used enough sick days. The first repayment installment arrived in my account on a Tuesday afternoon in April. I was at work, in the middle of taking vitals on a 4-year-old who was telling me a very detailed story about a squirrel she had seen on the way to the hospital. I felt my phone buzz. I looked at the notification. I looked at the number. And then I looked back at the 4-year-old and said, "And then what did the squirrel do?" Because my patient was talking and the money was just a number and the eggs, as they say, were getting cold. I want to tell you about the house on Church Hill. It sold in January, 2 months before the settlement came through. I drove past it once after the sign was gone. There were new curtains in the front window, yellow ones, and a wreath on the door. I sat in my car for a moment. I thought I would feel something sharp, but what I felt instead was something closer to recognition. That house had been a symbol, and symbols can be replaced when you understand what they actually meant. What I had wanted was not that specific porch or those specific trees. What I wanted was evidence that I had built something no one could reach into my phone and take in 9 minutes on a Wednesday night. The house I bought in June is on a street called Libby Hill, 3 blocks east of the one I lost. It has a red front door and a kitchen with a window that faces east, so the morning light comes in while I make coffee. I moved in on a Saturday with Caleb and 2 nurses from my unit and a rented van. We carried boxes up the steps, and Caleb dropped one that turned out to be all my books, and we stood in the front yard laughing at the pile of paperbacks scattered across the grass. There was no moment of ceremony. We just carried things inside until the van was empty, and then we ordered pizza and sat on the floor because the couch hadn't arrived yet. My mother was not there. My stepfather was not there. That was not an accident. Caleb transferred to a college in Virginia in the fall. He's studying criminal justice, which I think makes a kind of sense that doesn't need explaining. He comes over for dinner on Thursdays when his schedule allows. We are learning how to be siblings, which is different from learning how to be family because family was something that was done to us, and being siblings is something we're choosing. He still keeps a notebook. Old habits. I told him he should consider law school, and he said he'd think about it. I think he will. People ask me whether I feel guilty about taking legal action against my own mother. They ask carefully. The way you ask someone about a scar you can see, but aren't sure you should mention. I understand the question. I've sat with it. Here is what I know. My mother sat in her kitchen and practiced crying. She rehearsed the specific words that would reach into the deepest, most unhealed part of me, the child who watched her get hurt and couldn't stop it. And she used that pain like a key to unlock my bank account. She did not do this in a moment of panic. She did it with preparation and strategy and the calm confidence of someone who believed I would never find out, or that if I did, I would forgive her because I always had before. My stepfather coached her. He told her which trauma to use. He calculated that the abuse story was the one lever I couldn't resist. They sat together at a table and planned how to steal 5 years of my life, and they called it saving the family. I love my mother. I need to say that because it's true and because saying it is part of how I've made peace with the rest. I love her the way you love, a language you spoke as a child and can still understand but no longer use. It's in me. It always will be. But love is not a blank check. And the word family is not a password that unlocks everything you own. Caleb and I had Thanksgiving at my house this year. Just the two of us and a couple of friends from my hospital. We made too much food and the turkey was slightly overcooked, and someone brought a pumpkin pie that was actually exceptional, and I still don't know whose recipe it was. We talked about work and school and movies, and then at some point, late in the evening, Caleb and I ended up on the porch and he asked me if I'd heard from Mom. I said I hadn't. He said he had, once, a text that said, "I hope you're eating well," which is the kind of thing she says when she wants to reopen a door without admitting she closed it. We sat with that for a while. The streetlights on Libby Hill have a particular color at night, warm and slightly orange, and the houses across the street all had their windows lit. I told him I wasn't ready to talk to her. He said he wasn't either. We didn't fix anything. We just named it and went inside and did the dishes, and that was enough. I still work at the children's hospital. I still take the early shifts sometimes, not because I have to, but because I like the hospital at 6 in the morning, the way it smells like coffee and floor cleaner, the way the night nurses hand off their charts with the particular exhaustion of people who have been awake in a building full of sleeping children. I like my job because every day someone comes to me in pain and I help them feel less of it. That's not a metaphor. It's literally what I do. I check vitals and administer medications and hold the hands of parents who are scared and tell them what's happening in words they can understand. There's an honesty in that work that I find necessary. No one pretends. No one practices crying. The pain is real and the help is real. And at the end of the shift, you go home knowing exactly what you did and what it cost. I kept the voicemail. The one from that Wednesday night, my mother crying, saying he hit me, saying please. Not because I need to hear it again. I don't. But because erasing it would feel like erasing what it taught me. And what it taught me is not a lesson about trust, exactly, or even about family. It's a lesson about the difference between a story and the truth. My mother told me a story. It had all the right elements. Fear, urgency, a villain, a rescue. It was designed to make me act before I could think. And it worked because I loved her. And because the story she told was the one I had been waiting my whole life to hear. That she was finally leaving. That she was finally choosing herself. That she was finally asking me for help with something that mattered. The truth was smaller and uglier. The truth was that she needed money and I had it, and she knew exactly which wound to press to make me open the door. Here is what I want to say to you, and I mean this directly. Not as a character in a story, but as a person who is sitting in a house with a red door and a kitchen full of morning light that she almost didn't get to have. If someone in your life has learned which version of themselves makes you say yes. If you have noticed that their emergencies always seem to require your specific savings account. If the word family is used in your house the way a lockpick is used on a door, not to open something for you, but to open you for someone else. You are allowed to change the locks. You are allowed to stop answering the phone at 11:14 on a Wednesday night. You are allowed to sit at your kitchen table and make a list, instead of making an excuse for someone who has already made their plan. Protecting yourself is not betrayal. It is not selfishness. It is not the cold and difficult thing your mother will tell you it is when she calls to say, you are destroying the family. It is the thing you build your life on, and no one, not your mother, not your father, not anyone who practiced their tears in a kitchen before picking up the phone, has the right to take it from you. Caleb gave me a housewarming gift when I moved in. It was a small framed print, nothing fancy, just a line from a poem he'd found somewhere that said, "The door you build is the door you keep." I hung it in the hallway by the front entrance, right where you see it when you walk in, right where you see it when you leave. It's the first thing I read every morning and the last thing I read every night. The door is red. The door is mine. And I'm the only one who has the key. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know which part hit the hardest. Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, please share it. Sometimes the thing that saves someone isn't advice. It's just knowing that someone else walked through it first and came out the other side with their own door, their own lock, and their own key.